Delivering this week's must-watch workplace storylines, this is Bloomberg Law's Punching In, for those of you listening in Washington and across the globe.
Hey folks, thanks for punching in with us here in our last weekly episode of 2018. Happy New Year's to everyone. Merry Christmas and happy holidays to everyone. Today's episode will be a special episode. I have my colleague Chris Opfer joining me here in the studio to do a sort of rundown of our greatest hits, if you will, from the labor desk here at Bloomberg Law. Hey Chris, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me in again.
Of course. Always happy to have you down here from New York. So I thought it'd be a good exercise here to sort of go through the best, most impactful stories that we had from the desk last year. And of course, a lot of these stories, as is the case with when one does a good job of telling a story, they sort of have ripple effects and can sort of continue on into the new year. So tell me what comes to mind for you when you think of sort of the best and the greatest hits of 2018.
Well, the first one that jumps out to me dates back to early in the year when our colleague Ben Penn started reporting on the DOL tip pool fiasco.
Of course.
The story there was that the DOL was working on this rule that would make it easier for businesses to force tipped workers to pool the tips that they received with their coworkers who don't necessarily receive tips. So primarily in situations like restaurants where servers get tips, they could be forced to share some of those tips with back-of-the-house workers like dishwashers and bus people. Mm-hmm. Not that controversial there. The controversy came when Ben reported that the DOL had done some analysis that showed that the rule they were proposing could have allowed managers to skim as much as billions of dollars in tips.
Right.
By allowing those managers to participate, and that they hid that analysis before putting the rule out. Raised a lot of questions, created some controversy on the Hill with hearings, et cetera, and forced Congress to eventually address the issue by closing that gap and allowing managers to participate in tip pools via funding legislation.
Right, little mystery there over the shelved data, or allegedly shelved data, if you will. And as far as I understand it, that situation is sort of still continuing. There's still a probe going on about that, correct?
That's right. The Inspector General is looking into that, doing some sort of investigation as to how that came about, what were the steps in which DOL decided to hide that sort of data, and whether there was anything, unethical or a violation of any rulemaking laws.
Anything untoward there, right? So we'll definitely keep following that story as well to see what happens with the investigation. The one that sticks for me isn't a particular story, but sort of our coverage of the Federal Labor Board. This is, of course, an agency that a lot of folks don't know about. Our regular listeners definitely will. And I'll just say, I'm trying to make this stick somewhere, but Senator Warren likes to call the Federal Labor Board, the NLRB, the most important agency you've never heard of. And I would put on this list sort of our wall-to-wall, years-long coverage of the NLRB, which is usually a pretty quiet agency. But at the start of the Trump administration, got kind of mired in a bunch of controversy over some ethical scandals and conflicts of interest. There was a major issue of joint employment, which comes up on the podcast all the time for our regular listeners, where the Republican leadership at the board, and this was actually under the prior chairman, Philip Missimar, wanted to steer through the board an interpretation of labor laws that would have sort of made it harder to hold more than one company liable for supposedly violating the law. And that case was shepherded through, later had to be withdrawn because one member was found to have a conflict of interest. The board is now under new leadership, of course. John Ring is now the chairman, but there's been a lot of ripple effects from that. One ethical thing cloud that sort of started this administration's tenure at the Labor Board. And there were multiple other stories that we sort of break on the same issue. Chris, you yourself broke a couple of stories about some subsequent investigations. To talk about that a bit.
Yeah, they all stem largely from questions about board members' previous work at law firms before joining the board,
right,
and what cases they have to sit out as a result of that experience. And so to me, it's an interesting question at the board because it could very well impact what sort of cases they take on and what sort of decisions they put out. But it also raises some interesting questions government-wide about both the bread and butter conflicts issues, the ones that are black letter law based on this executive order, and a pledge that nominees sign when they take certain official positions. But then there's also this like shadowy question of the appearance of a conflict and what
right,
things might not be actually an ethics violation, but might look so bad that folks should should really consider sitting out certain things. And where the administration draws that line eventually could certainly impact who's up for these jobs, who gets picked for them, and who takes them.
Right. And similar issue there, right? We still see the continuing impact of Ben's great coverage of the tip pooling issue here, and sort of collective effort in covering the NLRB. We see that question is still percolating, right? That question applies to a huge case involving McDonald's, probably the most important case at the Labor Board right now, again, about the same issue of joint employment, basically both parties trying to tweak the law in a certain way to either make it easier or harder to hold multiple companies liable for the same set of labor law violations. And as you said, this is a question that applies much more broadly as well, right? That those questions of ethics and what issues and cases a presidential nominee, cabinet members, all of them can participate in is a question that remains to be answered. And we were able to get sort of answers and pseudo answers from sort of all the relevant bodies there, other than the White House Office of Special Counsel, who of course is the office that presidential nominees actually sign a contract with, the White House Ethics Agreement. As I said, that the ripple effects from that continue on, and we still have yet to hear about whether or not the chairman of the Labor Board, John Ring, and another member, the same one who was previously found to have had a conflict of interest, can actually participate and work on the McDonald's case. So we'll keep up on that as well. Now, Chris, some other stories, individual stories that come to mind were some coverage you guys had of Microsoft. And when I say you guys, I mean our colleagues, yourself, Paige Smith, Porter Wells also contributed to some of this coverage. But a lot of that came out of the OFCCP, which is sort of like the paid discrimination police of the federal contractor. So tell us a bit about, I believe there's a Microsoft story and a couple others as well.
Correct. Two big stories for us out of the OFCCP, which is one of those sub-agencies that a lot of folks don't know about, but certainly has a lot of power because it polices pay practices by federal contractors, which includes a wide variety of companies these days. The first was against Cisco and the other was against Microsoft. The Cisco case, the OFCCP found that company had violated the law by discriminating against American workers in favor of foreign visa holders. In the Microsoft case, there are allegations from the OFCCP that the tech company has been paying women less than men for virtually the same work. The Cisco reporting was that this investigation had happened and OFCCP had made this finding. Right. And it was interesting because it comes as, the Trump administration was taking a closer look at a wide range of immigration policy. The Microsoft case was interesting because there was a settlement at one point hatched between the DOL and Microsoft to resolve that investigation, and those claims went all the way up to the top levels of DOL and was killed by Labor Secretary Alex Acosta, according to our sources, because he felt like it was letting Microsoft get off too easily.
Right. And that actually brings to mind for me two other stories we broke that had a sort of similar fact pattern where a major corporation was reaching out to the administration officials to sort of resolve a case a bit differently than the Obama administration might have. We broke big stories about involving Walmart and CNN as well. And sort of sticking with the tech theme, we also had a big scoop about what was ostensibly the first union of coders, a company called Anetics. We broke that story as well as the eventual settlement in that case, which was just under $1 million. So yeah, I think that's a great roundup. That's definitely the sort of the greatest of the greatest of our hits. There was lots of other great reporting from our colleagues here on the desk, but that is a brief overview there. So again, happy holidays, Merry Christmas to everyone, Happy New Year's, and be sure to punch in with us in 2019.